King Charles will work from home for the foreseeable future while he's being treated for cancer. Tonight, the strategy of sharing the news of the King's cancer diagnosis. What effect will it have? We'll ask the former press secretary to Charles and Camilla and the head of Maggie's Cancer Charity, whose president is Queen Camilla. Plus, in a slimmed-down royal family, who will be the face of it in the coming weeks and months? The royal editor of the Sunday Times is here. Also tonight, the Prime Minister has been criticised for this.
I'll bet you £1,000 to a refugee charity you don't get anybody on those planes before the election. Will you take that bet?
Well, I want to get the people on the planes, right? Of course I want to get the people on the planes.
£1,000.
Right, I want to get the people on the planes.
Was it deeply distasteful, as Labour have called it, or would he have been criticised for not backing the bet, as one Conservative commentator has argued? And
what a cow, she needs her head examined. I'll be coming to visit you personally with a few of my hitty-batty friends. This is your only warning.
The death and rape threats made to councillors and their staff who work in local government. Is it putting democracy at risk?
I don't do surgeries anymore because I don't want to end up like Joe Cox or like David Amos.
Good evening. You will know by now that King Charles has cancer. We don't know what type, but a spokesperson said it wasn't prostate. Constitutionally, nothing has changed. Charles will continue to work, albeit from home. Like so many of us, the King is now part of the cancer community, and it's very likely that the diagnosis will have been a shock, because it often is, and was discovered while he was being treated for something else, an enlarged prostate. Tonight, we're going to talk about the King's decision to share the news and about how it will affect the royal family in the coming weeks and months, particularly as they are now a so-called slimmed-down monarchy. Nick is here alongside the Sunday Times royal editor, Roya Nika, Charles and Camilla's former communications secretary, Julian Payne, and the chief executive, there's Julian, and the chief executive of Maggie's Cancer Charity, Dame Laura Lee. Welcome all of you. Thank you very much for being with us. And Laura, you were actually with Camilla just last week, opening a new Maggie's support centre in the Royal Free, when obviously Camilla was asked how her husband was getting on. How did you react to this?
So obviously, like all of us, it's always a shock when you hear someone who you love, respect, admire has a cancer diagnosis, and it's no different with the King. And so of course our thoughts at the moment have to be with him, the Queen and their family as they adjust to this news and work out what the next steps are in terms of their cancer treatment pathway.
You obviously know the Queen well. She was asked by one of the consultants last week, how is Charles recovering? And she said he's getting on, doing his best. I wonder if you look at those words in the light of the news today, perhaps in a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. And also on that visit, she sat with a group of people affected by cancer, as she does on all of her centre visits, where she heard about how cancer had impacted on their lives and how they were coping and navigating some of the challenges. So reflecting on her, listening to their stories and the empathy and compassion that she showed on that day when obviously they were wondering what might be ahead for them.
Nick, the statement from Buckingham Palace, it tells us quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, Vic, this is the most open statement I can think of by any monarch about their health. So in addition to learning that the King has cancer, we also learnt that this is a modernising monarch who wants to be transparent about his health, in contrast to his mother and his grandfather, King George VI. So let's look at the final part of the palace statement that was issued tonight. And it says, the King remains wholly positive about his treatment and looks forward to returning to full public duty as soon as possible. He is, of course, a famous workaholic. And then the statement says His Majesty has chosen to share his diagnosis to prevent speculation and then, and in the hope it may assist public understanding for all of those around the world who are affected by cancer. Now, we saw this transparent approach in recent weeks when the King was open about his diagnosis of an enlarged prostate, and we are told that he was very happy that that transparency encouraged men to seek checks. And the King will obviously be hoping that his openness about cancer might well have a similar effect. And of all the warm messages we've had tonight, two stand out from two politicians who have survived cancer. So here's the message from the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, who ended his post by saying, "As a cancer survivor, I know how impactful his decision to share this news will be in lifting understanding for those affected." And then we can look at what the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Treating, what he tweeted. And he talked about how 1 in 2 of us, talking in personal terms, will develop cancer during our lives, but millions more are affected when someone they love is diagnosed with cancer. And he ends it by sending his best wishes to the King for his treatment.
Let me bring in Julian Payne, a former Communications Secretary for Charles and Camilla. Obviously, you know them well. I wonder, how do you think Charles will be coping with this news behind closed doors?
Well, I think having just come off a difficult couple of weeks with the prostate experience that he's had, he will no doubt be frustrated. In many ways, he finds these things difficult because he'll want to be out working, he'll want to be out meeting people and getting on with the job. But at the same time, what he will be thinking is, well, if I have to go through this, I'm going to use it as a way of raising awareness, just as he did with the prostate treatment, where by putting that in the public domain, I think the NHS inquiries went up by over 1,000%. So he'll be frustrated that it's getting in the way of the diary, but he'll be thinking, well, if I have to do it, then I might as well try and help as many people as I can.
Yeah. Roya, I mean, in terms of the timing of a cancer diagnosis, there is never a good time. I speak from experience. But he hasn't long been in the job that he has waited for all his life.
I mean, it is extraordinary news. This is a man that's just 17 months into his reign, and so much was made about how long he had been preparing for that job. And those of us who, back in September, looked at the sort of 1 year into Charles's reign, I mean, I remember writing about, how steady the ship was and how pleased the King and Queen and the household were about how he was sort of steering the monarchy ship through what had been very troubled waters in the last couple of years really quite well. Julian's right. He'll be frustrated that he wants to be out there. But I suppose the things that the King will have to think about going forwards are the things he wanted to achieve and do and the connections he wanted to make with things like the Commonwealth, and will he be able to attend Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in the autumn? All those things will depend on how he responds to his treatment, and let's wish him well. But I mean, there are challenging times ahead now for the monarchy.
Yeah. A slimmed down monarchy, which is what King Charles wanted, we are told. Who is going to step up? Who will step up in the coming weeks and months?
We have already seen the Queen step up in the last couple of weeks. We saw her out on a lot of engagements last week. I mean, Prince William has been out of action for a couple of weeks, clearing his diary for Catherine as she recovered from surgery. We know he's going to start duties again on Wednesday. I think the mood music is he will do whatever he can, whilst also, trying to care for his wife who's still recovering. But I think we will see him step up even more. He has done as the Prince of Wales. And the rest of the family will rally around. As we got the news tonight, Princess Anne was out and about doing one of her regular engagements. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh will too. So, the royal family will rally round, but slimmed down monarchy, much has been made of that. But I think the King has always been very keen to put the focus on, the royal workhorses who help him, and we will see them come to the fore even more now.
Yeah. Laura Lee, how does it help when someone as high profile as this, I mean, this news has gone around the world. Yeah. The American networks are all over it. How does it help when someone like this shares a cancer diagnosis?
It's a huge, huge thing, and it's a huge gift he's given to people affected by cancer, because one of the things that they talk about is feeling alone, that there's no one else like them, that the uncertainty of what's ahead. And by sharing, as he has done so openly, he's giving others the opportunity to share their own diagnosis and to reach out and get the help that they need. So it's a wonderful contribution that he's taken by leading in this way, by being so open. And I know that his wife, the Queen, will be right alongside him in that journey.
Julian, the statement shares a lot. A spokesperson said it wasn't prostate cancer, but they haven't revealed what kind of cancer it is. So there will be speculation around that. What will the thinking be there in terms of why they haven't said what kind of cancer it is, do you think?
I think that he recognises there is this opportunity to encourage people. I hope that there'll be conversations happening around the country, perhaps this evening over the coming days, where partners will be leaning across to other people and saying, look, that thing, go and get it checked. You can see it can happen to anybody. I think that he will take that as a good opportunity. But at the same time, it's important, I think, that he allows himself a little bit of space to deal with this privately and personally. And so he's trying to find the right balance, and the palace will be acutely aware of wanting to be transparent. They'll have seen the impact that the prostate had on raising awareness, and they'll want to repeat that. But at the same time, you have to give the individual, the private individual, the opportunity to deal with the challenge as well.
Yeah. And everyone in the studio here is nodding. I mean, that, you know, he may be the king, but it is a shock.
I think what Julian just said is he will want to find the balance. He is a workaholic. Julian knows that firsthand from personal experience. And what was interesting about that statement was the palace's absolute determination to convey from the king, constitutionally nothing changes. I'm still doing my red boxes. I will still meet with the Prime Minister for the weekly audience. I will still see the Privy Council. But, you know, he will really have to see how his treatment goes.
And he may well still be working out what treatment paths and options he wishes to take. So it may not all be yet set in stone. And he will, I'm sure, reveal it when he has decided those next steps.
Right. So do you think that's a possibility, that
I think
the specifics of which cancer it is might
well, you know, the guidance is for the time being it'll be private, but that's not to rule out that he may choose to talk about it further on. And of course, on the family point and the family rallying, the family will rally round, and we have Prince Harry coming for in the next few days. So, you know, there's a lot going on, but the focus will be on the king and wishing him well.
Yeah. Charles obviously has, as the monarch, has a lot of constitutional duties. How is that going to work then? I mean, you talked about Chogham later on this year, but there's other important stuff in this country, isn't there?
Yes, so the palace statement did address that, and it made clear that during his treatment, the king will postpone public-facing duties, but as Roy was saying, he will continue to undertake state business and official paperwork, it says, as usual. And you can see in that statement another reason for transparency, which is the general election which will be held in the coming months. Because, of course, the monarch plays 4 key roles around any general election. Firstly, they have to agree to dissolve Parliament to let it take place. They have to appoint a new Prime Minister or confirm the incumbent in post. They have to approve a new cabinet or a reshuffle cabinet, and then they have to open the new Parliament. And if we are not going to be seeing the king in the near future, the palace is making clear that he can absolutely fully perform 3 of those duties. He will no doubt want to have fully recovered to allow him to open the new Parliament, but if he's not fully recovered, he could follow the precedent set by his mother and ask the Prince of Wales to do that.
Nick and Laura, Dame Laura Lee, thank you very much for being with us. Roya Nika and Julian Payne, I think we're going to talk to you a little bit more in a moment, if that's OK with you. Joe has been looking more deeply into how the Constitution is set up for others to take on some of the monarch's duties, should that ever be needed.
God save the King!
God save the King!
He waited 73 years for the job of his life. Now, 17 months in, King Charles is already having to step back. His biggest challenge was, of course, his first. A royal transition after the death of the country's longest-serving monarch, mourning his mother, touring the country, leading her funeral procession,
Great pleasure.
Providing stability in rocky political times, and officially marking the start of his own reign. King Charles has made up for lost time, already visiting Germany, Romania, France, Kenya, and the United Arab Emirates to attend the COP climate conference after a lifetime's interest in the environment. He's even appointed himself Ranger of Windsor Great Park. The King's cancer treatment started on Monday, possibly at the place it was discovered, the private London clinic, during his treatment for a benign enlarged prostate. It was the same hospital chosen by his daughter-in-law, the Princess of Wales, and has previously been used by Prince Philip, Princess Margaret, and even a young John F. Kennedy. The clinic's leading cancer centre was opened by Queen Elizabeth in 2010. While the King will step back from public duties, he will continue his weekly audience with the Prime Minister and with the monarch's duties of state. These include granting royal assent to primary legislation of the UK, Scottish and Welsh Parliaments and the Northern Ireland Assembly, assenting to secondary legislation, approving certain public appointments, approving the appointment of ministers, authorising the affixing of the Great Seal of the Realm to certain documents, like royal proclamations to dissolve Parliament, or letters patent to confer a peerage or ratify a treaty.
The King and Queen stepped down from the airliner.
But since 1937 and the reign of George VI, there are arrangements in place in law in case a monarch is incapacitated. The pressure for reform came from the fact the heir apparent, Princess Elizabeth, was just 10 years old at the time. So the 1937 Regency Act was born and can apply when the monarch is under the age of 18, or is out of the country, or is incapacitated. One provision is for the monarch to delegate certain functions to councillors of state, as Queen Elizabeth did, asking Princes Charles and William to attend the state opening of Parliament in 2022. Under legislation, councillors of state are all members of the royal family. They are the partner of the monarch, Queen Camilla, plus the next 4 in line to the throne who are over 21. The Prince of Wales, the Duke of Sussex, the Duke of York and Princess Beatrice. But in 2022, the royal household said only working royals will be called on to be councillors of state, meaning the Dukes of Sussex and York and Princess Beatrice are effectively out of the picture. The same year, the Councillors of State Act 2022 added the Princess Royal and the now Duke of Edinburgh. Legislation is also in place for a regent to take the monarch's place, although this hasn't happened for hundreds of years. If there was to be a regency, and this seems highly unlikely at this point, the regent taking over the sovereign's duties is the next in line to the throne, currently the Prince of Wales. But Charles and William have no say. Instead, the decision of whether a monarch is incapable of carrying out their duties falls to 5 people. The partner of the King or Queen, in this case Queen Camilla, representing the monarchy, Lord Chancellor Alex Chalk and Speaker of the House of Commons Lindsay Hoyle to represent Parliament, and Lady Chief Justice of England and Wales Dame Sue Carr and Master of the Rolls Sir Geoffrey Voss to represent the law. The monarch does not need to agree with their decision. Unfortunately for the King, a very private medical matter is not just of public interest, but public consequence. And he may be continuing with his duties of state, but how will disappearing from public view affect his young reign? One of the monarch's strongest tools is their image and their presence. As the King's mother once noted, "I have to be seen to be believed."
Well, let's pick up on that point from Joe. Julian, how will disappearing from view affect his reign?
I think from a personal perspective, he'll be deeply frustrated. As Roya knows from having followed him around the world, his work schedule is punishing, and he really enjoys being out and meeting people and having the chance to speak up on causes that he cares about, on representing the nation. So he will find that difficult. The reality, of course, is the machinery of state continues. The red boxes will come. The meetings with the Prime Minister will happen and the Privy Councillors. So that side of things will continue, but he will be itching to get back to things as quickly as he can. The good thing, of course, is although he is 75, he is a very fit and healthy 75-year-old, having spent time out with him on the road and travelling the world. I can attest to how exhausting it is, quite frankly, trying to keep up with him a lot of the time. So I think he's in as good a position as anyone can be to get through this next chapter, and he'll be absolutely chomping at the bit to get back out as quickly as he can.
But having said all that, Roya, he is 75. Now, you know, it's not as old as Joe Biden, it's not as old as Donald Trump, but what if he does want to step back?
He won't want to step back if he can continue with his duties. Julian knows the King. I've seen him in action for a long time. He's not going to want to step back if he doesn't have to. It'll be about other members of the royal family picking up, you know, the slack while he can't be on public duties. The Queen, I mean, the Queen is 76. She is a very energetic 76, but 76 nonetheless. And it's a lot of pressure on her, not only, you know, doing more duties, worrying about her husband too. And I think we will see her, you know, step up a lot to fill that void. And I'm sure we will see Prince William more doing public-facing things. I mean, we know, you know, Julian's talked about the fact that the King will be frustrated, but he will know that he's got members of his family who he trusts to do those roles if needs be.
What impact does Prince Harry coming here have, if anything?
It's a very good question. Look, the last few years have been really difficult for the royal family, for the King, for Prince Harry and his departure, for Prince William, the implications of that. But what the King has always made clear, and as the late Queen did herself before she died, was that whatever Harry decided to do in his life across the pond, he remains a much-loved member of the royal family. The King loves his son. Prince Harry loves his father. He will want to see him because he's unwell. There will be all sorts of speculation about him coming here and what it means, you know, whether it will be, you know, bridge building. But actually, I think the King will want to see his son in this scenario, and Harry will be keen to see his dad. Yeah,
and that's completely natural, Julian, for any family. When there's a cancer diagnosis, you often just want to be together.
Yes, I think Roy is absolutely right. There are two sides to the royal family. There is the institution and the job it is there to do as monarch, as head of nation and state, and then there is the family. And what they're very good at, actually, as I've experienced in the time that I was working there, is they can hold those two things apart. So you can have a very clear view on how the institution needs to go about discharging its duties and what that means for people coming around and supporting the King. But then you have the separate family aspect, which, like any family, people come together when people aren't well, and they show support and they do what they can to help them get through difficult times. And I don't think that this family is any different in that regard.
Yeah. And the discovery of it in an incidental way, as we know from the statement, while he was having treatment for an enlarged prostate, again, that is like thousands of other people who go in, perhaps after a waiting list. I'm sure there wasn't a waiting list for him, but go in and a cancer is found.
And I think actually what is interesting about the way we have seen him handle his health news in the last month, it has been a completely different kettle of fish from the last reign. He has chosen to be really open about it. Again, in this statement, he said he hopes that by being open about his diagnosis, it will encourage people to, you know, get checked in the same way that we saw a more than 1,000 increase in checks from men around prostate stuff. So the King will hope that some good can come of an incredibly challenging situation for him in the monarchy.
Thank you both very much for being with us on Newsnight tonight. Roya Nika of the Sunday Times, Royal Editor, and Julian Payne, former Communications Secretary for Charles and Camilla. Thank you. Thank you. Now, coming up, before the end of the programme, we're going to get reaction to this. Rishi Sunak and Piers Morgan and this particular bet. Or was it? But first, dead rats posted through the door, cars being petrol bombed, and rape and death threats. Some of the horrific abuse facing councillors and their staff who work in local government. And it's putting democracy at risk. That's according to 6 organisations representing local authorities who are warning it's likely to get worse as the general election gets closer. We've spoken to a parish clerk who had dead rats posted through the door, a councillor whose abuser was given a jail sentence, and dozens across all levels of local government reporting harassment and abuse. Almost a quarter of councillors say their team has received harassment and abuse so severe they've had to put in place a security plan, like involving the police. Surveys by the Local Government Association show that abuse is widespread, with more than 4 in 5 councillors receiving some form of harassment or bullying from the public in 2023. That's a 10% increase from the year before. Here's Charlie Haynes.
He was going to rape me. It was a rape threat. I have no doubt about that.
You've done it now. We're coming after you.
Well, it has a knock-on effect to your family. It affects your mental health.
I don't want to end up like Joe Cox or like David Amos.
These aren't national politicians. You won't know their names. They work or volunteer in local government. They run your local library, they approve your home extension, organise your bin collections. But we've spoken to dozens of councillors and local government workers like these across the country who face abuse, often with little to no protection.
I always say Stapleford's the centre of the earth, and if you edit that bit out, you're in trouble.
Richard McRae is a local councillor at town and borough level in Stapleford, Nottinghamshire. He's done it for 10 years, but it hasn't been easy.
I used to be a doorman, I was a bouncer, some of the roughest places around. You know, we've had people pull out knuckle dusters, I've been threatened to be shot, I've had people pull machetes out and all that lot. That's never personal because they just don't know you. The abuse you get being a councillor, yeah, I'd say it's worse. It's ongoing. Sometimes it goes on for months and months. We've lost a really good councillor in Stapleford because of this kind of stuff. She was getting a bit of abuse and, you know, intimidation and she ended up knocking on the edge. She says it's not worth it.
Some of Richard's abuse has been so hate-filled that in 2021, one of the perpetrators was jailed for 3 years.
There was a lady that used to live around here in Stapleford that was quite abusive online. I ended up having to block her over 30 times on Facebook alone.
I was sent a video. I received it on Boxing Day. It was a chap hammering on the town hall door demanding to see me.
Hello? Appointment? No, I don't have an appointment. I don't think I need one.
Yes, you need an appointment.
No. I've been trying to get hold of Councilor Claire Golby for months now, and I'm getting very...
And because of the fact that he'd said he wasn't going to stop, that was when I said, I'm not risking this. So they waited for him at the meeting and he was given a harassment warning after that. But yeah, this is the things that you've got to put up with. It's an immersive experience, as Claire said.
Claire Golby has been a councillor for nearly a decade, but the abuse she faces has intensified in recent years.
Evil talking as if their pals running the shop, chop them up and put them on the stove. What a cow, she needs her head examined. I'll be coming to visit you personally with a few of my hitty-batty friends. This is your only warning. So the biggest fear is being approached and something happening. It's got to be. For anybody in public office, it's got to be. David Amos was attacked in a surgery situation, which is one of the reasons why I don't do surgeries anymore, because I don't want to end up like Joe Cox or like David Amos. And I know it might sound really dramatic and oversensitive, but it happens.
These aren't isolated cases. I've spoken to people across the country in local government who face similar abuse and harassment. A lot of them haven't wanted to speak on camera for fear of making it worse. There are about 100,000 councillors in local government at all levels and more staff on top to support them. Research carried out by the Local Government Association found more than 4/5 of councillors say they've received some form of abuse or harassment. That's up 10% on the year before. 22% of councillors, almost a quarter, say their council received abuse so severe they had to put in place an action plan, like involving the police or bringing in security. But it's not only councillors who are suffering. We spoke to one parish clerk who was targeted.
In 2019, I had threats towards me in relation to rats being put through my door. When my daughter yelled, "Mum, there's a dead rat," and then I knew straight away what had happened, and it was just horrific. In May, I was not in a very good place at all. And it's only because I have a very good doctor and she had a phone call with me that she managed to get me counselling, and I am so grateful to them. But it is still horrible, and I still, being honest, haven't really fully recovered, but I don't like admitting that. And it's not somewhere I ever want to go again. And I've never been like that. And to be honest, it's the first time I've ever really sort of properly admitted it.
What do you think motivates the people who are sending this kind of abuse?
There's one of two things. It's either someone who's been drastically disinformed through conspiracies they've read online, conspiracies that flow unabated with no guardrails, that in fact can be amplified by the algorithms which reward controversial commentary online with more visibility. But the second thing is something called negative social potency. It's a psychological trait where people get pleasure from causing pain. And that's really worrying for our democracy and for the people who've been brave enough to stand for election.
According to the Local Government Association, 27% of councillors said they wouldn't stand in the next election. 2/3 of respondents said abuse and intimidation influenced whether or not they'd stand again. With an upcoming election, people are worried about increasing levels of abuse. In 2015, extra police protection was made available for MPs, but that same protection isn't offered to those in local government.
What I want the government to do, and they can do it quickly, even before the local elections coming up, is to put in place with the Local Government Association a package of measures to give particular protection to those councillors who are suffering really bad abuse now, to make sure during the run-up to the elections they are protected both in person and in their homes.
The Local Government Association is calling for the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities to drop the requirements for councillors to make their addresses public. A government spokesperson said any intimidation of anyone is unacceptable. People who are elected or who volunteer in the local government sector help deliver vital services. If they receive abuse, they should contact the police.
It's just the dumbing down of democracy that you get locally, because it just completely inhibits what you try and do as a local politician.
If you want proper governance in this country, we need good people to come forward.
But if people don't want to be councillors, then and these decisions aren't being made, someone else is going to make them. And that someone else is going to be someone that doesn't live in your area. So we need to stamp out this abuse and intimidation and get local people representing local people, and then everyone wins, don't they?
That report from Charlie Haynes, produced by Ellie Jacobs. Now let's talk to Joanne Harding, who is a Labour councillor in Trafford. Thank you very much for talking to us, Joanne Harding. I wonder if you could share with our audience what's happened to you.
Yes, thanks for inviting me. And whilst I'm delighted that we're talking about this, some of those stories were horrifying, really, weren't they? So on a personal level, I've had threats made against me. I've had to have cameras installed at the front of my house and the back of my house. I've had sexually explicit material posted to me. I've been harassed and shouted at in the street. Phone calls telling me people know where I am and where I go and visit. So deeply disturbing things that can feel really alarming for somebody that's in the public eye such a lot.
Absolutely, but why do you think people are doing it?
I think there's a couple of reasons, really. It feels a bit like open season on politicians and politics in general. Politics feels different. The world certainly feels angrier. I've been a councillor now for 12 years, and I would say that the last 3 or 4 years, my experiences have been different. People feel angrier at the state of the world. They want somebody to vent to. If you're a local politician and a public figure, you can sometimes be a target to do that, and they think that that's okay. I agree that social media does play a part, but I don't think that it's all of it. I really don't.
But if people are angry at the world, why is it a local councillor like yourself's fault?
But I think politicians are seen, we tend to get lumped in the same councillors and MPs, and I think one of the recommendations that came out of some of the work of the Joe Cox Foundation was about the education, political education that the public have around roles and what we do and the powers that we have and the work that local councillors do. There is a real disparity between the protections that are offered to MPs and the protections that are offered to councillors, and just the way the roles are looked at and people understand what we really do. So it's not okay, it's absolutely not okay, but those are just some of my observations on why I think people behave like that sometimes.
Right. And without naming names or going into details that might reveal stuff that you're not supposed to, why have you got cameras at the front and back of your house? What's happened?
Because I had somebody turn up at my home address. I think the other thing is, as local politicians, we are what I would describe as hyperlocal. We're out in our communities. people tend to know where we live sometimes. It wasn't that long ago that our addresses were actually on the public website. They've only recently all been redacted. But I had somebody turn up at my front door. So that was the reason why I've had cameras put up the front and the back door, to make me feel safer, really.
But when you say somebody turned up at your front door, what did they do?
Well, they were angry about some of the implications of COVID and so on, and it was about...
Sorry, I missed what they were angry about. Sorry, Joanne. They were angry about what?
COVID and lockdown and the implications of that. And again, that goes back to what they feel, how they feel politics affects their lives. So I had somebody turn up at my door saying that as a councillor, I should be listening. And I think somebody on the last bill made reference to conspiracy theories. Those things can have a massive impact on people. And they think that local councillors can change some of these things. So yes, turned up at my door, made threats. And as a result of that, I had to have extra security put in place.
You've been doing it for 12 years, you said. Does it make you think twice about standing again?
No, absolutely not, because it's a role like no other. I absolutely love it, hugely privileged to do it. And I think it's up to me and other councillors to stand up and call this out, to make those changes. I want to see more women in politics, not less. I've seen good women leave politics as the result of this. I understand why they do it, but I want to continue to fight to make those changes, because I think we change it from the inside and we welcome more women into politics. That's why I'm staying.
How do you change it from the inside? How do you stop people being angry? You can't.
Well, I think there's a bit about the education. Political education starts in schools and colleges, starts with the public. I think there's something about having those conversations. The whole theme of the Local Government Association's campaign is debate, not hate. How do we frame that? What does debate mean? I can have an opinion as a citizen and a councillor. You might disagree with me, and that's okay. But we need to have that debate and that zero tolerance to hate, really.
OK. Well, thank you very much for talking to our audience tonight. Thank you, Joanne Harding. We appreciate it, Labour councillor in Trafford. What did you think of the Prime Minister shaking hands with Piers Morgan over whether planes will take off for Rwanda before the election?
If I said to you, I'll bet you £1,000 to a refugee charity, you don't get anybody on those planes before the election, will you take that bet?
Well, I want to get the people on the planes, right? Of course I want to get the people on the planes.
£1,000.
Right, I want to get the people on the planes.
OK, we'll talk about the reaction and also whether Rishi Sunak actually, he shook hands, but he didn't say, yeah, sure, I'll bet you.
Yeah, and it's interesting tonight that Downing Street are not getting into, well, that wasn't formally a bet. If you ask, look, what do you think of all that? They're just saying, we're confident the Rwanda plan will work, and it's vital that it does because the current situation means people are losing their lives trying to cross the channel. So they're not trying to get into any sort of row over this. I mean, there's quite a reaction. John Ashworth, who's in the Labour Shadow Cabinet, he says not a lot of people facing rising mortgage bills and food prices can casually drop a £1,000 bet. And he talks, John Ashworth, about how this shows how Rishi Sunak is totally out of touch with working people. Interestingly, from the Conservative side, Tim Montgomery, who obviously established the Conservative Home website all those years ago and then did briefly work for Boris Johnson, he said accepting a £1,000 bet on refugee migrants was tasteless. Separate issue then said it was wrong of Rishi Sunak to meet Michelle O'Neill from Sinn Féin, the new Northern Ireland First Minister. And then he said, put those two together, Sunak really shouldn't be in politics. But I was talking to one former cabinet minister who's a close ally, a big supporter of Rishi Sunak, and they said to me that they think this is a classic social media story that isn't going to get cut through outside the bubble.
We'll see. I suppose, I know I've been looking at social media today. There are people saying, damned if he did, damned if he didn't.
Well, is
that fair?
Well, if you're the Prime Minister and you're interviewed by Piers Morgan and you basically give the same answer, you know, Piers Morgan is probably going to do something like this. And I bet you in Rishi Sunak's mind, he probably thinks he didn't do a bet because, as you see, and Tom Peck makes this point in his sketch in The Times tomorrow, as he is shaking hands with Piers Morgan, he's still giving the same answer, which is, I'm absolutely confident that we're going to get these flights off before the general election. Which
but he could have said, I'm not going to bet on something that's so important. I'm going to get the flights off.
Yes, I mean, Professor Hindsight is a fine person, but you need that at the time.
Fair enough. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Right, let's have a look at some of the front pages of the newspapers. And of course, there is only one story for most of them. The Times says simply, the King has cancer. The Guardian says King Charles diagnosed with cancer, according to the Palace. And then there is that fantastic photograph of Taylor Swift at the Grammys, making history alongside Lucy Dacus and Phoebe Bridgers. And then we have The Sun. Nation shock as treatment starts. He told William and Harry himself, King, I have cancer. And quite a few of the papers referring to the Buckingham Palace statement that the King remains wholly positive. And the Financial Times, they lead on US private equity, boost dividends by piling on debt as borrowing costs ease. And then at the top, King Charles stepping back, King diagnosed with cancer. That's all from us tonight, but we cannot go without remembering Ian Lavender, the last surviving member of the Wilmington-on-Sea Home Guard. He was just 22 when he was cast as Private Frank Pike in Dad's Army back in 1968, the year I was born. It was a part he played for a decade, a part he's been celebrated for in the many decades since, thanks to a performance that showed he was far from being a stupid boy. Good night.
You've no guts. It wasn't my fault, sir. I mean, it was perfectly simple for you. And all you could say was, I want another upside down egg. And I wanted another upside down egg. Out, you stupid boy.